for really making the time again to meet with us. I know we had a lot of more regularly occurring meetings last year when we were doing our analysis phase, and then we had a pause. And in the pause, we've been working very hard to come up with our recommendations, draft recommendations that we hope to share with you today, share with the community members through some virtual open houses in the coming months, and then finally get to the board and our council for review. But I will go ahead and share my screen. Can people see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. So I think everybody kind of knows the core members of the technical working group. So I won't go through formal introductions. I will say we have also today a couple of additional people. Some of our colleagues from the Mid-County team are here since they are working on the LSC overlay zone. We also have Mike Shuffle from the Office of Agriculture, since we've been talking to him about the intersection of this policy with some farmland preservation programs, et cetera. And on our side, we have Deputy Director Robert Kernenberg's in the room, Atul Sharma, the project manager, and then Grace Bogdan from Down County team has been helping us with this project, as well as Lu Wei Wong, who joined us last year working in the director's office. So we have a pretty full agenda, but before I get there, I wanted to turn it to Robert and see if, Robert, you want to share any opening words?
Yeah. So thanks Atul and Grace and Luay, and I want to say Bilal as well, who I saw on the line here, for all the work that's gone into this. It's and for the working group for kind of taking the time to go through this, I think in a very thoughtful approach with Atul and the group. Most of it's been 14 years, I think, since this was initiated, and we've been applying it for that long with sketch plans and site plans. And I think, we've made changes with master plans to prioritize, some of the public benefits. And I think this is an approach to really look at it more holistically on how we apply the public benefits. And so excited to see it. I was involved in a lot of the work early on 14 years ago, as a number of the people on the call are here, but excited to see the recommendations and see how this moves ahead. But I want to say how much I really appreciate everyone's involvement in this, to really take a thoughtful and comprehensive approach to moving it ahead.
Thank you, Robert. And also, first of all, did definitely want to say Bilal sort of serving a different role here, but he's been very much a part of the team. So thank you for that, Bilal. And we also have Don Pitts from Hyatt Brown, who is our consultant on this project, who's really helped us keep this policy grounded in dollars and cents by looking at the costs and feasibility aspects of this policy. So today we have a pretty packed agenda here, as you can see on your screen. We have a lot of information to share, so we will sort of pause as we go at places where it makes sense and open it up for discussion. Unless people think they want to hear the whole thing and then get into discussion, that's fine as well. But we will share with you today the draft recommendations for updating the public benefit point system. We'll share the overall approach and how we sort of viewed the overall policy on the first 30 minutes, maybe have a little discussion after that. And then we will break down how we are recommending this policy be applied to each of the 4 zones, the CR, CRT, LSC, and EUF zones. And then the last third of this presentation, we hope to unpack in some detail the various public benefits and how we expect this new version of this policy to be applied. And we will also share sort of what we anticipate to be next steps. The one thing I will say is that this is a lot of information, so we will share the slides with everybody on this call after this call is over. We also welcome any requests to meet with us over the next 2 to 3 weeks as a follow-up. If you want to schedule that, we are happy to do that and available. Um, we do have 2 open houses, virtual open houses scheduled on May 8th and May 15th. We'll send an invite link to that after this meeting as well. And then our planning board work sessions are scheduled for June and July. So, this is the first time you're seeing this. If you have questions, comments, we are happy to continue the discussion after the meeting. And there are further opportunities for providing input and feedback in a more public forum as we take the show on the road, so to speak. So just to kind of remind everybody, this project is looking to update the public benefit point system. We are really hoping to identify best practice and recommend changes that will ensure a balance between the public benefits required, the cost of development, and updated county goals. We've done a thorough review of the existing policy, and we are hoping to modernize it, and very importantly, align it with updated county priorities as have been outlined in Thrive Montgomery 2050, the Climate Action Plan, and our county's sort of increased focus on equity and social justice. During the analysis phase, as you all remember, we did a very comprehensive deep dive into the current system. We evaluated every aspect of the policy, from its theoretical underpinnings to its financial assumptions and to the experience of the users who implement this policy on a daily basis. We talked to internal staff, we talked to stakeholders. We took a range of quantitative and qualitative analysis of the policy, and we looked at what others were doing in the same type of programs. And we took all that and we synthesized it into objective, data-driven takeaways, and that's what we are using to base our recommendations that we'll share with you today on. And so at a very high level, what we learned from all that analysis was that there's actually been very uneven amount of development activity across the 4 zones. Just to give you a quick data point, 98% of the projects in this policy in the past 14 years have just been in the CR and CRT zones. LSE zone has received no optional method of development, and we've had 1 project in the EUF zone. So it's sort of been applied very differently across the 4 zones. And that's one of the reasons why we have recommendations kind of tailored to each of the 4 zones that we'll share with you. The point system is a very expensive menu. It was bigger than any other menu we compared ourselves to. But even then, we've received a subset of public benefits, a much smaller subset of public benefits, repeatedly in optional method projects. And we know that considerations of cost and feasibility were sort of taken into account, but were not a primary driver of creating the original system for a variety of reasons. It's hard to estimate the cost of some of these benefits. Some of these might have policy importance to them and not necessarily a cost consideration being the primary focus. But it's important to note that those aspects were considered but didn't become like a defining feature of the current system. The one thing that we found very interesting too was that the point system offers a very indirect mechanism of exchange and negotiation, in that applicants following the optional method of development are looking to get approvals for projects in terms of square footage and FAR, but we evaluate the public benefits being provided through a system of points. And this was partially done because of the model of that was used to create the system for LEAD for neighborhood development. But we found that all more recent programs across the country have used a much more direct way to evaluate public benefits. And so it is an anomaly that we use this sort of method of points. And we have a recommendation to change that to what we think is a more clear and better system, and we'll share that. And last but not the least, so much has changed in the world in the past 14 years. The way we build buildings, where there is demand for projects, how the construction codes and the green codes are evolving, how mobility is considered and how walkability has become such an important feature for new development. We want to modernize this policy to reflect all those changes that have occurred in the world in the past 14 years. And a picture is worth 1,000 words here. So here are two graphs that you've seen previously in the past, but on top you see all the 36 public benefits and the number of times they were included in a project. And you can see that certain public benefits like structured parking, exceptional design, building lot termination, minimum parking were delivered over and over again in the 67 projects. While other public benefits like a habitat preservation or TDRs were never delivered. So there's a mismatch in how many times different public benefits have really made it into the ground. And then the chart on the bottom compares the public benefits that were delivered in the red bars and compares it to the public benefits that were prioritized through master plans in the blue bars. And you can see that there is a pretty big disconnect in that master plans are prioritizing certain public benefits, but we're actually getting a different set of public benefits through development. And we are trying to think of ways to bridge that gap because we think that's an important sort of gap that needs to be filled. We did take all our analysis work to the planning board in the fall of last year, and they gave us some very high level but very clear guidance. Number one, they want us to simplify the policy. They very clearly stated that housing and environmental resilience were two important policy goals that should become a key factor in the updated system, and that we should look to other important ideas in plans like Thrive and Climate Action Plan to align the public benefits with. At the same time, they also recommended that we provide flexibility to master planners, regulatory reviewers, and applicants to implement this policy. And in some zones where it might be possible, they did tell us to see if there are ways to make development more streamlined and as close to by right as possible. And we've looked at the 4 zones and we have some recommendations around that. So our overall approach is really trying to do philosophically 2 things. One is to modernize the policy so that we can reflect updates that have occurred in the real estate construction industry, as well as the economics of doing business in the county over the past 14 years. And then really creating a menu of public benefits that would align with key policy goals and help move the needle on those policy goals for the next 10 years or so. We did want to highlight a few very important points here before we sort of get into the recommendations themselves. One, that everything that you see today as a recommendation is based on project data, jurisdiction research of how others are doing things, and our financial feasibility analysis. We've done a lot of interagency coordination. We've met with DHCA to talk about the housing-related benefits. We've talked to DEP and DPS to talk about the energy-related public benefits. We are having ongoing conversations with MCDOT to make sure our transportation-related public benefits are all things that can actually be delivered through optional method. We want to make sure that we have a menu that doesn't become another list where none of these benefits are delivered because the implementation of this is problematic. So we're really trying to focus on that. We've also talked to the Arts and Humanities Council to talk about how we can expand the purview of providing public benefits related to art and placemaking. We are maintaining the menu-based approach because we think that's a good approach. There's no need to reinvent the wheel because the wheel works great. Although we are proposing a more focused set of categories that align better with our priorities as a county. And then we are tailoring recommendations of how this policy should be applied to each of the 4 zones, because what we have found is that there's very uneven amount of activity under the optional method development in each of the 4 zones. We do want to continue to promote and recognize transit-oriented development as a desired outcome, but at the same time, we want to make sure that public benefits being provided with those projects meet the needs of the greater community, and it's not just all inherent public benefits to a given building. And a slightly sort of different approach to reviewing public benefits, we are proposing that we should really focus on and incentivize the things we need to achieve the vision for the county, even if these are regulatory requirements. And that's slightly different from where we have approached these type of negotiations in the past. And also, if a project is able to do something that meets more than one public benefit criteria, that they should be allowed to quote unquote double dip into that, because at the end of the day, a public benefit is a public benefit. And if one strategy or one element of a project meets more than one public benefits, that is a public benefit. And we think it makes practical sense. So in summation, we're trying to simplify the policy. So there's a shorter menu. We're trying to make the policy more proportional. And this is where we are proposing that we use FAR to evaluate public benefits as opposed to this sort of 0 or 50 or 100 points. We are trying to make the policy much more clearer by establishing what is required as a gatekeeper requirement. And we are trying to make the policy more nimble and flexible by suggesting that master plans have a little bit more flexibility and leverage to ensure that the public benefits that are identified during master planning phase are delivered through optional method development. So let's try to unpack all this because it's a lot of information. So number one, we are continuing to use the menu-based approach because we think it makes sense. We are continuing to use the concept of standard method and optional method of development. So standard method FAR would be the things, would be the lower, 0.5 FAR as it is today in the CR zone at least. And then optional method FAR would be up to your mapped FAR. And in the cases of places like Bethesda, where you have an overlay zone, there might be density beyond the mapped FAR that projects can also seek. And what we are sort of continuing to suggest is that projects meet all the gatekeeper standard laws and requirements to build up to the standard method FAR. And when they want to build up to the mapped FAR or dip into a density bank, so to speak, where it exists, that they have to provide public benefits. And the way we would evaluate those public benefits is by assigning an increment of FAR to each of the public benefits in the menu, and projects would have to demonstrate how they are earning the right to build up to that mapped FAR or their total FAR. So keeping things quite similar in terms of the mechanics, but trying to get a little bit more nuance. And I'm going to turn to Grace to clarify further what all are we suggesting are the gatekeeper requirements.
Thanks, Atul. Hi, everyone. So when we're talking about gatekeeper requirements, we wanted to make sure we took stock of what that means in terms of our existing regulatory process. And so for site plans and standard method FAR, we went through the zoning ordinance and looked through our technical review requirements and findings that we have to make when we're taking these projects forward to the planning board approval. So this list on your screen is sort of taking stock of those items. And I'm sure this is no surprise to everyone on the screen that these requirements have grown over time. They've become more intense over time in sort of their individual way, whereas Chapter 25A, for example, the MPD law has grown over time from 12.5% to 15% in most areas of the county. And other individual requirements of other agencies where we require agency approval, those particular requirements have grown over time. So we want to acknowledge that doing development in Montgomery County, we understand is no small task, and we wanted to sort of take stock of these items and really acknowledge what we mean by gatekeeper requirements and make a definition for this term because it's going to be continued to use throughout the project.
Thank you, Grace. So that's for the gatekeeper requirements. And then for the portion of the density for projects that require optional method and the delivery of public benefits, we are proposing that these 4 policy priorities on the screen really become the public benefit category. So there is complete alignment between the categories for public benefits and what we have found to be the most important policy priorities. So I'll talk a little bit about each of them. Housing for all, we all know that the provision of market rate, attainable, and affordable housing is of great need across the county. So housing for all would capture all those public benefits, and we'll show you sort of the list of them. Environmental resilience really looks to creating more sustainable buildings, sites, and using as much renewable energy as possible to mitigate sort of our carbon emissions and be able to meet the very aggressive and ambitious targets that the Climate Action Plan has set forth. Thrive Montgomery 2050 also talks about focusing growth along corridors in a compact format. So infrastructure for compact growth, which would include transit facilities, bike facilities, pedestrian facilities, is included under infrastructure for compact growth. And then this idea that Thrive promotes that our neighborhoods be really complete communities where one can enjoy the benefits of living within a 15-minute walk or a 5-minute drive to most of their daily needs, as well as places to live, work, shop, play, etc. So really trying to align the public benefit categories to these 4 policy priorities is one of the draft recommendations that we are putting forth. Under each of the 4 categories, you would have a shorter menu of public benefits. So under housing, there's obviously MPDUs, family-sized units, and deeper levels of affordability. Under environmental resilience, there would be public benefits related to energy efficiency and the use of renewable energy, as well as providing certified green buildings and using strategies that create more sustainable sites. And we'll talk about what these are. Under infrastructure for compact growth, we would have benefits related to providing offsite improvements for pedestrian facilities, bicycle facilities, transit access, etc., creating facilities related to transportation, such as bus shelters, bike parking, etc., and also providing incentive for creating new streets and grid connections for trails and trail connections that would really create that more compact form of development that is needed. So some of these might be sector plan recommendations or requirements, but we think they're important enough that we should find ways to incentivize them through the optional method of development. And last but not the least is the complete communities category that has 4 distinct public benefits: art and placemaking, neighborhood services and mixed use, which is pretty similar to what exists today, great public realm that talks about the provision of high quality parks and public open spaces, and design excellence, which really quantifies the criteria that we would consider to be the highest and most impactful design strategies that projects can use. Now, currently we have 36 benefits. These are only 13. So a question might come as to, are we limiting choice? And we've thought a lot about that. And we think that there is a way to actually be more flexible, but have fewer public benefits. And we are proposing that each of these public benefits has levels of compliance that people can choose to provide. And I'll share one example here. This is showing the renewable energy public benefit, for example, and 4 different tiers of compliance that a project can sort of achieve. So tier 1 is the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak. Tier 2 is a little bit harder. Tier 3 gets even harder. And tier 4 is the top tier public benefit. So in this case, if a project is able to either utilize renewable energy from the local submarket or generate a third of its renewable energy on site using solar, geothermal, etc., they would be eligible to earn up to 0.25 of their mapped FAR. If they increase that commitment to 2/3, they would be able to earn 1 FAR of their mapped FAR. And as they go further up their commitment, they're able to achieve the right to build more of their FAR. Tier 4 in all the public benefits is pretty significant. In this case, it is a project that would generate 100% of its energy on site, which is a very high bar. So in cases where a project achieves a tier 4 public benefit, we are recommending that that project be exempt from providing other public benefits just like today, when you provide 20% MPDUs, you don't have to provide other public benefits. Just want to expand that concept to all the public benefits that are in this shortened menu. So a project following the optional method of development would be expected to provide a public benefit, at least one public benefit from either housing or environment, and at least one public benefit from infrastructure and communities. And we think this is important to try to bridge that gap that we talked about, where we want to make sure projects are not only doing things from the sort of more standardized countywide priorities, but also providing amenities that are identified through master plans for creating complete communities in a compact form of development. And if a project does provide a tier for a top tier public benefit, then they would be exempt from providing any other public benefit. And by doing so, we think we would create multiple pathways for projects to earn the right to build up to their mapped FAR. This is just a diagram that shows a building that has, a couple of floors of standard method FAR, around 8 floors of optional method FAR, and then could also have additional Excel to build density if the master plan created a mechanism for that. And a project could either do many small things from the 4 categories that we talked about, or they could do 2 slightly more significant things from 1 or 2 categories, or they could go all in and really sort of, exceed and provide the highest level public benefit from 1 category. And that way, it really sort of gives a lot of flexibility to projects to achieve their mapped FAR while providing public benefits that are really aligned with our policy goals and meaningful for the greater community. We did have Hyatt Brown really take a good look at all these ideas. They did a lot of costing analysis and comparison. And I'm going to turn to Dawn to talk a little bit about how they truthed some of these recommendations and helped us sort of modify and adjust them to make sure that the cost and feasibility impacts were not out of whack.
Sure, great. Thanks, Atul. That's a question. It looks like you can't see me. I'm just seeing a white block where my videos is, but I do have my camera on.
Yeah, I think we can't see you. We could see like a white square.
Yeah, it's kind of okay. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the camera off. We can skip back. I do want to talk to that first slide for just a second. So I want to talk a little bit about how we went about this. I think that many of you were part of the earlier discussions around public benefit costing around the old menu when we were going through these similar meetings last year. And so we took, I think, a really similar method of looking at in some cases, some of the benefits are the same. So using those numbers and potentially revisiting them. But again, going through, and we'll talk more about this on the next slide, using different resources to come up with what we felt were accurate numbers for each one of these tiers. And then after we did that, we evaluated the feasibility impacts of the new approach using the similar scenarios to the ones that Atul described just a slide or two ago. And we used those scenarios on various prototype projects that were essentially developed by Montgomery Planning, but prototype projects to represent a typical project in what we termed as urban, suburban, exurban, and then LSC zones or LSC areas. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
So this just goes into a little bit more detail about the costing methodology. It talks a little bit about some of the sources. So we looked at commercially available sources similar to such as RS Means, Marshall and Swift. That's like a typo I made there, but RS Means, Marshall and Swift. We looked at IREM when they were operating considerations. We also used our internal proprietary database based on projects that we've worked on and included information with discussions from developers that are working in the county and in the region in general. Then we developed kind of cost ranges for each of the tiers. There's a sample of what our calculations looked like to get a general idea of what the cost would be to provide the benefits in the new system. Across the tiers to ensure that, one, there was consistency. You'll notice here in the middle, that it doesn't look consistent. The reason why is because that is a different zone. Those are the numbers for the LSC zone, which we treated just a little bit differently than we did the CR and CRT zones. But wanted to just kind of give you a snapshot as to how we approach this. Next slide. The other portion is that in some cases, the Montgomery Plan is opting to allow payment in lieu. And so we worked with them to come up to determine in what situations that made the most sense. And here's a general overview of how we viewed payment in lieu. One thing to note, and I think that Atul mentioned this early on, is that in Tier 4, if you're providing a Tier 4 benefit, it is typically a very significant benefit. And so there isn't a payment in lieu option if you're providing Tier 4. You can't just make one payment in order to get all of the potential density. So the payment in lieu is generally calculated based, or not generally, is calculated based on a per square foot value. We looked at different ways to do that. We looked at whether or not it might make sense to look at things like land value or assessed value, and finally determined that the per square foot value made the most sense for what the county was trying to accomplish. A few other kind of keynotes about the payment in lieu option is one, that generally it's preferred that public benefits are constructed by developers. However, there are instances where a payment in lieu makes sense. One, and I think one of the most important elements is that a suitable vehicle exists to utilize the payments. There are some benefits related to some entities within the county where a vehicle doesn't really exist to allow the county to utilize the funding. So we want to make sure that that vehicle is in place first. A second element is when the public benefit is located off-site. So, it's one thing if the benefit is located adjacent or on-site or on a project site, but if it's off-site, that's another reason why a payment in lieu might make sense. The third thing is that when the sector plan contemplates the creation of a larger scale project or larger scale facility or amenity, using the payment in lieu function allows the county to have a vehicle to receive funds to pay for that larger scale public benefit that wouldn't necessarily be available or wouldn't necessarily be affordable or feasible for one developer to provide across one project, even a large project. One thing that the new program does include is a cost is that the payment in lieu would be adjusted annually based on the cost index, just to ensure that the actual payments are staying in line with inflation. And then the payment should be based on the cost of the specific benefit and then calculated based on the project size. And that goes back to that per square foot calculation we talked about. The reason why we find that valuable is because it creates some scale. So larger projects are able to make larger contributions in a way that makes sense and allows the county to, again, pool those projects related to the point that we discussed earlier about larger scale facilities or amenities, but allows the county to pool those payments to develop larger public benefits. And with that, Atul, I'll turn it back over to you. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm missing a slide. So the other portion, and Atul touched on this briefly, is the addition of something called Excel to Build. So what this does is where a project has already maxed out their available mapped FAR, and maxed out their available incentive density, it creates a program to allow a project to build additional density, assuming that it conforms to the master plan. And so what a developer might do is provide the full complement of public benefits under the initial incentive density program, and then put together a proposal to provide additional Excel to Build density in exchange for some additional public benefit. What's expected is that a developer would submit kind of a formal request outlining the additional density, outlining what the public benefit is and why it's not covered within the incentive program, confirming that it does align with master plan priorities, and then providing details on the cost of providing it, and to the extent available at that time, providing details on basic project financials so that the county has a good understanding of how providing this additional benefit affects the project in addition to what the county is actually receiving. And then the county would review that information to assess essentially generally the suitability of the overall program. Is it consistent with the context of the surrounding area? They'd also consider the relative value of the proposed public benefit, and then determine whether or not it adds additional value kind of above and beyond what's already being provided through the incentive density program.
Thank you, Don. And I would add one thing to this, that our proposal is that this be a strategy that master plans can consider and create if it is found acceptable during the master planning process in consultation with the stakeholders in the community. This would not automatically create this sort of bank of density over the whole county. It would really be done master plan by master plan. But what we found in our research was that places like Bethesda did sort of alter the menu and were very effective in getting the public benefits that were deemed the most appropriate by having this incentive of additional FAR beyond mapped FAR. So I just wanted to clarify that the recommendation is like this is a strategy that should be explored during master planning at a master plan scale. But if it does sort of get established that applicants can use that and provide public benefits to tap into that additional density. We've thrown a lot of new things at you. So we're going to take the next 3 or 4 slides to go over how this compares to the existing system, and then we'll pause for some questions and discussion.
Okay, so on the left side of your screen is what we know today for our existing categories, and those are the 7 categories. And we are recommending to consolidate them down to the 4 categories that Atul had previously mentioned, and these categories align with our policy priorities as a county. Next slide. Our existing benefits from those categories are listed on the left side of your screen. It's our smorgasbord, so to speak, 36 categories, and we are proposing to consolidate those down to the 13 subcategories within those 4 main categories, which is on the right side of your screen. And then most importantly, in our existing system, we have the points-based system. And as many of you know, if you've worked with that calculation, for the most part, it sort of computes out as to a project requiring to provide 100 public benefit points. And this often happens if your project is 2 FAR or if it's 6 FAR. And so what that typically means is maybe we're asking too much of the smaller projects and not enough of the larger projects. And so we are proposing the FAR-based evaluation system, which would tie the public benefit to a number of FAR. And so the more FAR you are proposing, the more public benefits or the deeper intensity of the public benefit would be delivered to the community.
So we do have recommendations of how this should be applied to each of the 4 zones. I wanted to take a temperature check here and see if people want to pause now for questions, or should we keep going and talk about questions later? Any opinions? Not hearing any, so we can sorry, go ahead.
Keep rolling.
Keep rolling. All right,
That's a lot.
Josh. Thank you. Thank you. We'll keep rolling. So how we see this policy should be applied to each of the 4 zones varies. And partially it varies because of the fact that most of the optional method activity has happened in just 2 of the 4 zones. We have never received an optional method project in the LSC zone. We've received 1 optional method project in the EOF zone, and we've received 98% of the projects in the CR and CRT zones. The CR zone had about 80% of the projects, and the CRT zone had about 18. So we feel that this policy in the beginning was created for 1 zone, then it was expanded to multiple zones. It really hasn't been effective to the same degree in all those 4 zones. So we want to have a more nuanced approach to apply it. And we'll go zone by zone and discuss that.
So our first zone is the employment office zone. Some examples of those properties are listed on your screen. They're usually located along our growth corridors and are larger in size with office type development, light industrial type development. And you can see that it's more surface parking, and many of these properties really haven't seen recent reinvestment.
And we also develop the zoning profiles for each of the 4 zones. Typically, I would introduce the philosophy behind. So we utilize the GIS approach to strengths over rationale and support the decision making. So it is important to emphasize that involve a geospatial analysis focusing on the parcel level, which means it helps us to understand how each zoning category operates in terms of their FAR ranges, the option method threshold, and the frequency of FAR categories. So this is a EOF zoning profile. So let's check around the data fact. So of course, all EOF parcels, the typical parcel size is constantly 1 acre, and the FAR threshold ranging from 0.25 to 3. So the option method threshold is 1 FAR. So when you close look at the bar chart below, you definitely can see the 0.75 FAR categories encompass the largest number of EOF parcels, and this falls below over option method threshold of 1 FAR. So such condition is vividly telling us that the majority of EOF zoning parcels, their development potential that's limited to the standard method, and only one EOF project has utilized the option method to gain the bonus density, and this is pretty much the data fact in the EOF zone. So I'm turning over to Grace to summarize the recommendations for this zone.
So in summary, what we've heard from our master planners is that the EOF zone is no longer being applied when reviewing and creating new sector plans. We've heard, or as Atul previously said, we've only had one optional method in the EOF zone, and that property was recently rezoned to CR in the recent Silver Springs sector plan update. And then, as Louay said, most of the properties in the EOF zone don't even have the density available for optional methods. So based on these key takeaways, we are recommending that the EOF zone be removed from the optional method type of development, thereby allowing properties to develop up to their full mapped FAR through standard method, and then in doing so, requiring a site plan for projects above 0.5 FAR to make sure those gatekeeper requirements we previously designed or described are still being met.
Thank you, Grace. We'll sort of cover next the LSC zone, and we do have some of our mid-county colleagues here as well. But you know, the LSC zone, as we all know, contains primarily life science, hospital, and medical office uses, as well as some academic campuses. Here are a few examples of the buildings you typically find in this zone.
Yeah, let's check around the LSC data facts. So the FAR values in LSC are ranging between 0.5 to 2. The parcels in this zone are typically larger, ranging from 3 to 4 acres. So only one single parcel has an FAR that falls at the lower boundary of the optional threshold, 0.5 FAR. All the others exceed this figure are considered for development under the optional method. In reality, we haven't received any approved project since 2010. So we delved into the realistic conditions in LSC and discovered that parcels eligible for development under the option method are already fully constructed, such as the Montgomery College Adventist Hospital. So what are the remaining parcels? They are all covered in LSC. They are all covered by the Great Seneca Master Plan Overlay Zone. So this is pretty much the data fact of the LSC.
Yeah, I think just to kind of recap here a little bit too, you know, we've never received an optional method project in the LSC zone. The Mid-County Planning Team is doing an amendment to the Great Seneca Plan, which will create an overlay zone for the Great Seneca Plan area. And outside the boundaries of that overlay zone, there's really 3 other properties, 2 of which have already been significantly developed. And the third one, Howard Hughes, does not have any zoning potential to even take advantage of the optional method of development. The overlay zone itself is, we think, a very strong and positive idea. It is intended to attract and retain life science development, but also incentivize the production of housing and achieve a complete community within the overlay zone's boundaries. And it covers all but 3 properties that are zoned LSC. For the overlay zone, we've sort of coordinated with the Mid-County team, and they are proposing the requirement of public benefits, which are very similar in nature to the 4 categories that we showed you earlier. And the overlay zone also provides you the ability to gain extra density for the provision of public benefits. So it's a very well-tailored, specific recommendation for the Great Seneca Plan area. And so therefore, we think that for the LSC zone in particular, we should continue to regulate public benefits through the Great Seneca Overlay Zone. And the 3 properties outside of that overlay zone boundary should be exempt from providing public benefits because they've either already been fully built out or have a condition of approval where development is capped to below optional method thresholds, or have zoning that would not allow for optional method thresholds. So really focusing public benefits and the delivery of public benefits in the overlay zone through that mechanism, we think is a much more cleaner and appropriate way to regulate public benefits for that zone. We're now going to move to CR and CRT zones. So far you've heard, less regulations and exemptions. Now you're going to see where we really want to focus on the provision of specific public benefits, because we think these 2 zones are the most important and the most appropriate benefits to appropriate zones to get public benefits from optional method projects.
Okay, so the CR zone, where the optional method is at. Typically in the CR zone, these properties are located in central business districts, along major metro stops, and in other downtown areas up in Up County. So some examples of down county projects on your screen: you have the Marriott headquarters, which is mixed-use taller buildings with residential and ground floor retail. In Mid-County, you can see some mid-rise buildings for multifamily. And then our example of an Up County type of optional method project is Century in Germantown. So you see more townhouse style development with a little retail center.
So also in CR zones, the FAR values are wider than those in UF and LSC, reaching from 0.5 to 8, but the parcels are commonly less than 1 acre in size. So the bar charts on the below illustrate that aside from the 0.5 FAR threshold, 98% of CR parcels qualify the optional method under over incentive policy. Additionally, the CR zone is a listed zone where we have received most approvals, with 53 projects approved under the optional method of the development. So I keep passing to my colleagues to introduce the CRT as well.
Okay, the CRT zone, the commercial residential townhouse zone. This zone is typically applied on the exterior of CBDs and other lighter transit stops, BRT stops. This was intended to be the transition zone, but I think what we've noticed in our data is that these are actually applied to larger properties at a larger FAR than what we had anticipated. But so on the bottom of the screen are some examples of those projects, and you see it allows for townhouse style development and lower to mid-rise multifamily residential buildings.
In the CRT zone, so once again, it features a FAR range of 0.25 to 4.75. The typical parcel size is less than 1 acre. The optional method threshold for CRT is 1 FAR. The bar chart tell us, you can see the right code here, that predominant number of CRT parcels adhere to the standard method. And since 2010, we have approved a total of 13 projects that employ the optional method developed in the CRT zone. So this is pretty much the effect of CRT.
Yeah, and this is an important point to note here because it ties into our recommendations, is that most CRT zone properties currently would not even qualify for optional method of development. And at the same time, CRT does have a pretty big range of FARs that has been applied to it. I think originally the idea was that the CR zone would be the highest intensity zone and the CRT would be this sort of middle of the ground, and then you have CRN. But really how the zoning has been applied over the past decade or so indicates that the CRT zone is not that different in terms of zoning potential from the CR zone, but has twice the threshold for optional method. So one of the recommendations we are making is that we should standardize the optional method threshold for both CR and CRT zones at 0.5. We think we can still maintain proportionality between those projects because we are recommending an FAR-based evaluation of public benefits. And if a CRT project has an FAR of 1.5, it's going to be expected to provide lesser benefits than a CR project that might have an FAR of 5 or 6. We are proposing that this method of standard method FAR and then mapped FAR and additional Excel to build density be applied to both these zones, and that master plans have the flexibility to modify the menu of public benefits. And if a master plan seeks fit, they can map heights during the master planning process that would enable the provision to have additional density built without exceeding the heights that were discussed during the master planning process. So in summary, again, for CR and CRT zones, optional method projects would have to provide at least one benefit from either housing or environmental resilience category, as well as one benefit from infrastructure and complete community categories, unless they're providing a tier 4 public benefit, in which case they would be exempt from providing other public benefits. We think that by doing this, we can focus the policy where we anticipate maximum public investment as well as private development. That simplifying the policy between CR and CRT will be a good thing for implementation, but a sense of proportionality can be maintained by using FAR to evaluate public benefits. And that in this way, we are really able to increase flexibility for applicants to meet the ability to earn their mapped FAR without compromising the quality of public benefits between one or the other zone. So the next part of the presentation goes into more detail about what each of the benefits under each of those categories are. I want to pause here again and see if any questions came up, or we are happy to finish the presentation and then get into a Q&A. All right. Not hearing any questions or comments, so we'll keep rolling, and then we'll have a good amount of time at the back end to answer any questions. So here are the 4 public benefit categories as proposed for CR and CRT zone, and we'll take you through each of these in a little bit more detail. For housing in particular, I want to make sure that, did someone have a comment?
No, I accidentally.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I can't see the chats. I'm just confirming. So for housing for all category, we really worked hand in hand with our partners at DHCA to come up with recommendations. And there are 3 distinct ways to provide public benefits in this category. One is just as in today, providing a greater percentage of MPDUs than the basic code or sector plan requirement. 2 is to provide family-sized units, both market rate and affordable for rent and sale. And 3 is to provide deeper levels of affordability, but with the flexibility to average the AMIs to get to those levels. And I'll kind of walk you through each of these. Before we get to that, I want to make sure we clarify that we are not proposing any changes to the MPDU law. That is something that is governed by another section of the county code. And we are not sort of proposing any changes to that. However, today, when you provide MPDUs greater than 12.5%, you get certain points. So like for doing 15% MPDUs, you might get 30 points. And what we have done is we've translated that into an increment of FAR that you earn the right to build within your mapped FAR. And when you get to 25%, you don't have to provide any other public benefits. And you're able to build all your mapped FAR for providing that. 2 things I want to point out here. One, that with the passing of House Bill 538, which was done, I think, a week or 2 ago, there is a significant amount of bonus density that will become available to any project within a certain distance of a metro station projects providing 20% MPDUs will get a 30% density bonus. Also, we are not changing any of the base MPDU bonus density that the MPDU law provides today. So now you have multiple stacking incentives, right? You get by providing a certain amount of MPDUs, you get the right to build to a certain amount of your mapped FAR. Then you get the bonus density that the MPDU program provides. And then you have the state bonus density, which stacks on top of that. So at 20%, you could be looking at a pretty healthy density bonus for qualifying properties. We did up the requirement to not have to provide any other public benefits from 20% MPDUs to 25%. And the reason we did that is because that is when the impacts tax reductions kick in. And what we have found in our analysis is that most projects either hover around the 15 or 17.5%, or they jump to that 25%, because that's when those financial incentives help make those higher levels of affordability a reality. So that's kind of the overall MPDU related public benefits we are proposing with this update. In addition to that, projects will have the ability to earn the right to build up to their mapped FAR by providing market rate and affordable units that are 3-bedroom. So for example, if a project provides around 5% 3-bedroom units, market rate and MPDUs within their development, they can earn the right to build 0.25 FAR of their mapped FAR. If they up that to 10%, they can earn the right to build 1 FAR of their mapped FAR. For single families, towns, and 2/2s, if you provide 4-bedroom or greater within those units for sale or rent, again, you can earn the right to build 0.25 or 1 FAR. Beyond that, for the higher tiers, if an applicant is willing to enter into an agreement with DHCA to provide at least 20% of all units as MPDUs at various levels of affordability, averaging at 60% of AMI, they could earn up to 1.5 FAR of their mapped FAR. And if they do that at 25%, that would be considered a tier 4 benefit, and they would not have to do any other public benefits. So those are the housing related public benefits. I'm going to turn to Grace to cover the environmental and the infrastructure related public benefits.
Thanks. So in the environmental category, we have 3 subcategories. That's for energy and renewable energy, green building, and sustainable sites. Within the energy, this is really similar to some of the categories that exist today. But in green building, this is newer, whereas the existing public benefit categories really don't recognize buildings that receive LEED certification. And so we've really created this category to reflect the Green Building Code. And we've worked with the Department of Permitting Services Sustainability section and created this. And this section is actually a good example of where if you're providing a LEED certified building, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's energy efficient. However, if you are providing a LEED certified building that is also energy efficient, you could receive FAR density in both of these categories. And then lastly, in sustainable sites, this category is really intended to have projects integrate design criteria within the building and within the site that is sustainable. Okay, so within the energy category, we are talking about energy efficiency and renewable energy. Tier 1, you'll see it's exceed energy standards or current energy efficiency standards by 10%. And so these levels as you go up are very similar to what we currently have in our public benefit category and guidelines. Going up to tier 4 in this category, it's providing a building that achieves a net zero energy performance. And then the renewable energy category, this was the example that Atul shared earlier, where the tier 4 here would be to generate 100% renewable energy on site. One thing that we would note is that these thresholds would need to be reviewed with every code cycle update. And we know that the current the building code or energy code is being updated now. And so this is something that would automatically need to happen as the county does theirs. In the green building category, again, this is a newer category where we're talking about LEED certification. So in the tier 1, we're looking at a building that meets the alternative compliance path for the green code and achieve LEED silver with the 21 extra points, scaling up to LEED gold and LEED gold with full electrification or mass timber. And then the tier 4 in this category, where no other public benefit points would be required, is a building that achieves LEED platinum. And then lastly, for the sustainable sites, this is, again, a category where we're looking at sustainable site design and building design. And so in tier 1, it's sort of a mishmash of things, and the way that it scales up is we start with designing a site that includes one of the following sustainable elements. And these elements include biophilic design, green roof, bird-friendly design, pervious pavement, or adaptively reusing at least 10,000 square foot of an existing building. These categories and the subcategories within each element increase through the tiers. And then looking at the top tier, and this one would be designing a site that includes all of the following sustainable elements to their max elements, or adaptively reusing a building with 100,000 square feet of floor area. Onto the infrastructure for compact growth category, we're looking at 3 main categories here. For offsite improvements, we're looking for projects that are providing offsite streetscape improvements or bicycle improvements, stormwater management, or other stormwater facility upgrades, or even daylighting a pipe stream. In public facilities, we're looking at dedicating or and/or constructing major public facility as identified in the sector plan, and including undergrounding of utilities. And then lastly, in grid and trail extensions, we're looking at connectivity through trails and street grid design. And so we're looking at reducing curb cuts, providing private trail extensions, and creating new public streets. For offsite improvements, the way that these categories scale, in the lowest one, we're looking at offsite streetscape improvements of at least 2,000 square feet. Or this is where we are introducing a payment in lieu option that can be modified by a sector plan. And the contribution amount here would be a minimum of $0.33 per developable square foot. And then the way this works, just for clarification, it would be the entire density for the project minus the 0.5 standard method FAR. So it's a little different than those on the call that are familiar with the Bethesda PIT payment. This is something that would be applied to your entire FAR minus the standard method. And so then these requirements scale up. In the tier 4 for this category, we're looking at a project that would provide a major stormwater infrastructure upgrade, such as daylighting a pipe stream, or as otherwise recommended within a sector plan. For public facilities, in the tier 1 category, we're looking for smaller major public facilities, such as a bus stop or bike parking, with an estimated cost of at least $100,000. Or again, offering a payment in lieu option for a sector plan to identify. And then these major public facilities scale up in cost. And then up in the tier 4 category, we're looking at a major public facility of at least $1 million, or providing undergrounding of utilities along the site frontage with an estimated cost of at least $1 million.
And I just want to add a note here that you'll notice that some of the things are being listed as public benefits that are along a frontage, right? But what we found is that certain things like undergrounding utilities are so expensive that even to do them along your own property's frontage can be a significant cost. So this is a good example of a public benefit that we think is important to incentivize, even though it may be regulatorily required as one of the prerequisites for a project. And I also want to mention that, yeah, we can go back here. And I just want to mention that, these things, these offsite improvements, certain projects might be required to do LATR improvements, but if they are able to do some of these things as a part of their LATR, we would recommend that those projects receive credit for that.
Atul, can I interrupt you for one moment?
Yeah.
It's Pat Harris, and you sort of just answered one of my questions, because in addition to, for instance, underground utilities, there was also the offsite streetscape improvements. So
Yep.
who gets to decide, okay, yes, this is regulatorily required under some other provision that we need to follow, but nonetheless, you'll get public benefit points for it? Or is it, if it's listed here, you'll get public benefit points irrespective of whether it's required or not?
That's our current thinking, Pat. The latter is that the implementation guidelines would list things that would be eligible for public benefits. So we want to eliminate the kind of uncertainty around it, because we think that is one of the reasons why applicants don't approach some of these, because you never know what the response might be. So but that is our thinking right now, is that there would be a list, and if an applicant is doing something from that list that meets the criteria, implementation guidelines, that they're eligible for asking for the right to build up to a certain amount of mapped FAR.
And so even if you go back to that MPDU slide on, I think it was slide 48, it
Sure.
said 15% MPDUs, and I think there was a public benefit associated with it, if I read it correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So-
sorry, go ahead.
So if you're in an area of the county that otherwise requires 15% MPDUs, and you provide your 15% MPDUs,
Yeah,
do you
I-
get some kind of corresponding public benefit? And I'm not clear on what the 1.25 here is exactly.
So currently, let me just start from what the current system is, and you know this very well. You know, for 15%, you get 30 points, right? Let's see, you're in White Flint sector plan area, which has a requirement of 15%, because it's a high income area.
Mhm.
We still give those 30 points to those
Mhm.
projects. So this is just repeating that practice and saying where there is a requirement, but you met that requirement for providing those MPDUs, that you would continue to get credit for that. And the 1.25 here is the amount of mapped FAR you would have earned the right to build by providing those MPDUs, just like you would get 30 of your 100 points.
So let me, okay, so just so I'm clear, if you're in a zone
Yeah.
that's, say, CR3,
Yep.
and standard method's 0.5,
Mhm.
you would get 1.25, so you'd get up, you'd get up to 1.75 by providing the 15% MPDUs. But then you'd have to get other
Yep.
things to climb up to your max max. Okay,
That's correct. That's
thank
correct.
you.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's absolutely correct. And
Thanks for
there
the
will
info.
be instances where the sector plan, for example, Bethesda,
Bethesda will make this different.
changes that, right?
Right.
And this policy will not supersede those sector plan recommendations that have already been evaluated and agreed upon and put into practice. But if there isn't a very clear thing that the board and the council, everybody approves, that changes those, like we did in the case of Bethesda, we are recommending to continue the practice, because in our analysis, we did find that MPDUs were one of the more expensive public benefits to provide.
yes, I had commentary on that as well, but I'll hold off on that.
Okay, so we are here.
Grid and trail extensions.
Yeah.
Okay. So the last subcategory for infrastructure are grid and trail extensions. And so here we're looking at, in the lower tier category, it could be a trail extension on private property with the cost of at least $100,000, or a public trail extension, and we're giving a linear footage for that. And we're also introducing project design. So if for reducing curb cuts. So if you have a project with 4 frontages and you're reducing it down to 1 or 2, you would receive public benefit points or FAR for that design. And then the way this scales up is within the project design. If you're providing a public street that provides through block connectivity that contributes to the larger network, we see that as a public benefit that is worth providing incentive density for. And then in the tier 4 for this category, we're looking at providing a major connection over environmentally sensitive area that will highly contribute and enhance the bike, pedestrian, and/or transit network.
So again, here as well, there might be instances where a sector plan recommended a grid of streets. What we are saying is that if a project actually implements that recommendation, streets are very expensive to build, especially if we want them to be built in a complete streets format to a public standard, that we would incentivize that. I will put a pin on all the transportation-related recommendations, since Rebecca had to jump off early here. We are continuing to have conversations with DOT. They're going to provide us some additional feedback on these, and we'll make sure that the final version of this includes their full feedback. We've had some feedback, but we need to have some additional meetings with them. Okay, and then we're getting to the last category here, amenities for complete communities. This is probably, you'll see things here that are the most similar to what exists on the current menu. However, we have tried to do a few modifications which we think are positive. We've expanded the public art category to a art and placemaking public benefit, and we've sort of increased the options to meet that. So you can certainly do a very small thing like provide a very artistic architectural building, or you can continue to take advantage of going through the public art review panel to install public art. But you can also make payment in lieu to more bodies now. Initially, you could only make a payment in lieu to the PATSC. We are recommending that bodies like urban partnerships, like the Bethesda Urban Partnership, or the arts and entertainment districts are included as eligible partners to install public art or to do programming within the plan area, things like farmers markets, concerts, cultural festivals, etc. And also looking at the full life cycle and the ecosystem for arts, and including things like housing for artists, or providing spaces for the creation and the display of art like galleries and theaters. Neighborhood services and mixed use public benefit continues to incentivize the provision of retail uses and spaces for community use, such as meeting rooms, etc. Great Public Realm talks all about providing high quality, privately and publicly owned parks and public spaces, or improving existing parks and public spaces that might exist within the plan area. And design excellence is really looking to create a list of what we consider the most impactful design strategies that the project can check off the list and request to receive credit for providing those as a part of their project. I wouldn't go into a lot of detail here, but it essentially encapsulates what I shared on the summary slide. For the different tiers of FAR, you can provide something very small, from just an interesting, graphic on your building or a sign, to, or you can make a payment in lieu, or you can install public art that is reviewed by the art review panel, or provide recurring accessible cultural programming for a minimum of 1 year or 3 years on a monthly basis. And then for the higher levels here, you can provide 5% of units as artist housing or live work units for artists, or for the top tier public benefit, provide a major public facility like a theater, art gallery, or a performance venue, at least 20,000 square feet in size. And then for the neighborhood services, it's incentivizing the provision of retail, starting at a very small amount of 2,000 square feet, going up to 10,000 square feet. And then at the higher levels, you're providing a minimum of 15 or 20,000 square feet of a public facility like a conference room, meeting rooms, event space, libraries, rec centers, educational facilities, etc. So as you go higher in your commitment, you can earn the right to build more FAR up to your mapped FAR. And then under Great Public Realm, continuing to incentivize the provision of high quality public space on site or within the plan area, or making contributions on a per square foot basis to the appropriate receiving entity, whether it's parks or another entity that's managing that public space. And the types of public spaces also range from a very small pocket park to a civic green to an urban recreational park. And again, if a sector plan made these recommendations, we think it's still important to incentivize them through development review. So we are enabling that through the recommendations, at least in their draft form. And last but not the least, design. We have a list that we've created of 10 things here that we think are the most important things that we look for in projects over and over again. So they include some very simple things like having a building with a clear base, middle, and top, or having human scale elements in the base, to big things like wrapping the parking with liner uses or undergrounding parking, to really big things like achieving a WELL certification or a Living Building Challenge certification for your project. And as you check more things off the list, you're able to request more incentive density be approved as a part of the application. So the last bit of this really talks to how we see this will be applied to projects in the CR and CRT zones. And I'm also going to look to Dawn to talk a little bit about how we model this from a financial feasibility perspective.
Sure. Thanks, Atul. So what we did is in working with with Montgomery Planning, we evaluated different scenarios across different what we call prototypical projects. So we crafted a base pro forma and then built prototypical projects. We'll talk a little bit about those in a few minutes. But those projects represented essentially a variety of different situations that are similar to projects that have been developed around the county. So the goal was to start with a baseline of what's a realistic development look like in various scenarios around the county. Then we applied various public benefit packages to each one of those scenarios. I'm using the term scenario and prototype, but really what I mean when I say prototype is a specific type of project. And when I say scenario, that's a public benefit scenario. And we'll talk about, we'll show you samples of what that looks like in a few slides. But once we did that, we just compared the feasibility for each one of those prototypes to understand how adding public benefits, or the cost of public benefits to those projects, in addition to adding the additional density, how that affected the project feasibility, with a goal to ensure that the county was able to extract these public benefits. I hate to use the term extract, but that really is what it is: extract these public benefits from the projects without compromising a developer's ability or a landowner's ability to develop a feasible project and make a reasonable return. We can go to the next slide. This is just kind of a snapshot for some of the outputs from the model. Generally, we determine feasibility based on target return thresholds, and they generally look relatively low, but the goal was to understand what's the base level of feasibility, what's kind of the very bottom. So in this example, the target return on cost was either 100 or 125 basis points over the cap rate, over the exit cap rate. The target equity multiple was 2, and the target levered IRR was 15%. Although generally we saw, which I think is more similar to what you might see in the market right now, or would have seen in the market more recently, we typically ended up with IRRs in the high teens or so, again, to get to that base level of feasibility. Generally, we assumed a sale roughly 24 months after stabilization. And the other thing that we did, and this was sort of an interesting part, and we had a lot of discussion around this, but across those scenarios, we held the acquisition costs steady. It really is difficult to determine acquisition costs, knowing that in some cases developers are land banking, or there's some other structure in place associated with the acquisition of the site. There's ground leases, there's partnerships with landowners, et cetera. But we held the acquisition costs steady kind of across the project. And if we move forward, these are the specific prototypes. And so what you'll see here is that the urban high-rise, so we were thinking a project in Bethesda on 3/4 of an acre. This is how, these are how we evaluated the public benefits. We looked at what happens if you develop a mixed bag scenario. So that means essentially public benefits from various, from all 4 of the categories at different levels to get up to a specific FAR. in this case, and specifically for Bethesda, there's Bethesda overlay zone additional density, and then there's also the Excel to build density to get these projects up to a significantly higher FAR, which is what you would typically see in Bethesda. Or in an urban site in the county. I'll say it that way. We were using Bethesda as our general idea behind our prototype, but the idea is an urban category. The second is an urban high rise on a slightly larger parcel, and you see that the FAR is not quite as high here. These projects aren't necessarily considering Excel to build density, but again, they're doing different things to kind of increase density across the various scenarios. So these would be a second set of scenarios that we applied. And again, it shows, you can see the colors relate back to specific categories, but it shows different ways to get to the level of density that a developer might be interested in. And I think it really does is illustrate the flexibility of the way that this new program works. Can keep going. So the next would be a suburban podium. So North Bethesda, as we've noted here, and similar ideas. Again, these projects aren't necessarily as dense as what you might see in an urban setting. And so you're not seeing quite as much FAR, and you're not seeing quite as many public benefits. But again, it shows different ways for a developer to get specifically to a goal FAR for a project. And one thing that we'll note is these can, well, I don't know if we necessarily need to go back, but one thing to note, depending on the project, so when you're talking about design strategies, for instance, there may be strategies, there may be items under that category that you're interested in pursuing anyway, just because it's something that either a target tenant may be interested in, or it's something that you feel that the market is requiring. So there may be ways to get to your FAR that allow you to be creative to get there without necessarily increasing costs significantly, but still being able to provide the benefits that the county is interested in getting to. And I think there's two more slides. So this is a much larger project. We talked earlier about the fact that with projects like these, the goal was to try to scale benefits. And so you'll notice in some cases it's exceed by 10%, exceed by 25%. And so many of these benefits actually do scale with the size of the project. Again, we felt that made a lot of sense with a larger project, that there should be the ability to provide additional benefits to the county. And then finally, so exurban multi-block, again, much larger type of project here. But this again would work the same way, where you'd be providing additional benefits to try to increase FAR. But what you'll notice is that because of the size of this site, you're not building up to you're not trying to meet a significant number of public benefits, because you don't necessarily need to get as dense. Mm-hmm. Then I think we have one more. And all this does is this is essentially showing you what those different categories are. You have your basic proposed structure, you have your mixed bag, so mainly tier 1 and tier 2. So you're providing a few smaller things across all the categories, or you're providing a little bit larger things across 2 categories, or finally you're providing one item from the tier 4 benefits. And again, the structure of that is to provide something really significant that is valuable to the county in order to receive your full complement of incentive density.
And then the last thing we wanted to share some recommendations on is related to the BLT and the TDR requirements. We know that the county has been interested in making sure that these programs remain successful and viable. Both the BLT and the TDR are on the current menu, so we had to kind of look into that anyways. BLTs are a requirement in the CR and LSC zone today, while TDRs are optional. There's no surprise given that nobody has ever provided a TDR public benefit in the 14 years that this policy has been in place. So we work very closely with Mike Scheffel and the Office of Agriculture to come up with ideas to see how this policy and optional method of development could help sort of support the 2 preservation programs. So essentially, there's a lot of language on this file, and we'll send you the file after this. But we are proposing two things. One, we are recommending that the requirement for how much of one or the other has to be purchased, BLTs or TDRs have to be purchased, is standardized between the two zones. Currently, in the CR zone, the requirement is 7.5% of your floor area, whereas in LSC zone, it's 50%. So there's a big discrepancy between the two. So one, we are recommending that both those become a 7.5% requirement. Number two, we are making the BLT and the TDR sort of a little bit more equal, that it would be required to purchase one of the two farmland preservation related public benefits, but you could purchase either BLTs or you could purchase an equivalent amount of TDRs. This would essentially make all CR and LSC overlay zone sites receiving areas for TDRs if we approve this. And if you do purchase TDRs, you would be eligible to receive a bonus of 4,400 square feet per TDR, which is the bonus that is currently prescribed to it when it is related to a red policy area. So again, to recap all of this, we want to support these programs through the optional method of development. We are recommending that the requirement to purchase BLTs and or TDRs be equalized at 7.5% of the incentive density floor area, that there be an option to either purchase BLTs or an equivalent dollar amount of TDRs. And Mike and his Office of Agriculture are exploring ways to help with that exchange, facilitate that exchange, just as today a developer can go to the Office of Agriculture and provide a payment to purchase partial BLTs. They're exploring whether they can have the ability to purchase whole TDRs from farmers and then sell those whole TDRs to developers. And we think that might be a great way to promote the uptake of both of these and provide the added benefit of getting some density bonus when you do purchase a TDR. So those in summary are all the recommendations. Like I mentioned, we have two upcoming virtual open houses. We welcome any request to have follow-up meetings over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Our planning board working sessions are in June, and there's one in July. And we hope to then take our recommendations to the county council in the fall. And once they are approved, we will then draft a ZTA in the winter and update the implementation guidelines. In terms of how this policy might be rolled out, we think there might be an opt-in period for this, where there's a certain amount of time when a project has the option to either use the old system or the new system. And we'll probably want to set up a sunset date for the old system and fully instate the new policy in place. And we would expect all new master plans to use the new policy as they create the recommendation. So that's kind of where we are. I would open the floor. I think we still have about 30 minutes to have a discussion and answer any questions that might come up, but would love to hear from the group, sort of first reactions, if this makes sense, anything we should consider as we take this to the community and to the board, and would love your technical expertise.
This is Pat Harris. I'll make one comment now, but this was a lot of information. You did a great job of presenting it. It's going to take some time to digest it.
Sure.
My overall concern, and I say this knowing that housing and affordable housing is a dire need, and I totally get that, and I think and encourage the county to continue to think creatively to how we can provide it. But it always seems that it comes back that the only answer is the way to provide it is on the backs of people that are developing housing. And currently the MPDU provisions are it's not a net neutral proposition for developers. It costs the developers, it's the greatest, it's a cost to development, and that's not the way the NPDU law was originally intended. And so now that it has become, if I understood it correctly, you either have to do the affordable housing or the environmental. Is that correct? Do I have that right? Okay, so, but if you don't do the environmental, then you are doing the housing, and so it's now an even greater cost than what the current status quo is. And and so I think it's a greater burden. I mean, I wasn't able to evaluate in depth the economic analysis that was done, but I'm concerned that it's going to create even more economic burden.
I think, thanks for that, Pat. And I just, from the mechanics of it, it's not requiring that you have to go above the requirement, right? So if the requirement is 12.5%, and you're doing 12.5%, and you do a green roof to meet some of the environmental categories, or even within the housing, if you provide the 5% 3-bedroom units that are market rate and afford. So it's not, I just want to clarify that the requirement is not that you have to provide more than what the law or the sector plan requires. And in terms of financial feasibility, I want to see if Bilal can put his planning hat on for a second and share any comments he wants to share, and also look to Don to provide some commentary on this.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying, I almost want to turn it to Pam in particular, but I was going to say, I mean, I think, the minimum requirement effectively acts in many ways as a tax. I mean, I don't know about the original intention, but currently, the 12.5 is not offset. And so, I guess that would be my point there. And so, right now, all of their, does the density bonus offset it? I think our analysis from December suggested that no, but it's an offset, but not an additional value per se. That's a larger discussion, I think, with the NPDU update that's being considered. But as for the history of the NPDU not intending to add an additional cost, I'm not sure, which is why I invoked Pam there in case she wants to add any detail there.
Well, and I don't know, Don, if you want to share any additional comments on the financial sort of impacts of including NPDUs in a pro forma.
Yeah, no, I certainly understand and your concern and agree with you that it is one of the more expensive benefits. When we run them through the pro formas, and I understand that there are real life impacts that aren't necessarily captured in the pro formas themselves. When we run them through the pro formas, you're still able to get to a feasible project. Not saying that it doesn't impact project returns and overall project. It does impact feasibility, but you're still able to get to a feasible project through many of these through many of these scenarios that we use where we increase the level of NPDUs. But I certainly understand the point that you're making with your comment that it is a very expensive it's a very expensive public benefit, and it's something that doesn't just tax the developer upfront, similar to, say, building streetscape improvements or something like that. There is absolutely a longer term impact on project economics that makes it more expensive, just generally. So we certainly understand and take to heart that comment.
Yeah, and just to sort of build on that, Pat, when we did our feasibility analysis, what we were finding was that projects were feasible even at 17.5, 20%. And when at 25%, when you were adding all the impact tax breaks, it did help. It didn't make an NPDU profitable, but we think that given all the density bonuses that are now in place, especially with the additional 30% density bonus with the state legislation, the impact tax breaks, that these should continue to be put on the menu as options. But at the same time, we're not requiring that you have to provide more than the base MPDU law requirement, right? So I just want to sort of provide that to the discussion as well.
And I will say that there is a point, and I think you highlighted this earlier, that once you get to a certain level, at around, I think it's around 20% or so, you either provide 17 and a half, or you jump up to the next level to take advantage of all of the other economic incentives to make the project work. So we do understand there's a little bit of a, I don't want to call it a hole, but there's, there are incentives to go from one point to another that kind of skips over that in the middle.
Okay, well, thank you for your initial responses. As I said, I mean, there's a lot of information there, and so it's gonna take a while to digest it. I appreciate your response.
Yep, no, and thanks for raising it, Pat. I think it's always front and center when we talk about this policy. So it's better to discuss it and talk through it than not. So thank you for raising it.
But Pat, this is Robert. One of the things I think that Atul brought up early on, which I do think a lot of the recommendations start to address, is that, when you looked at a very small project versus a very large project, they were almost doing some of the same things and providing some of the same benefits. And it was almost like the smaller projects were, to your point, maybe paying a little bit more for developing because they were smaller, whereas the larger ones were not. And I think part of this was really to address how that overall, I guess, equitable approach to to density was being achieved, and doing that on an FAR base like what they're proposing here, or seems to be a little bit more in keeping with the scalable approach for plan reviews. But your point is well taken and probably anticipated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions that folks have at this point?
I have a lot of questions and comments, but I don't know what they are yet. So like Pat said, this is a lot. And the biggest piece is going to be looking at this in context with the numerous other guidelines and functional plans and just how it all relates. When you try to explain this system to somebody who's from outside of the county, they're just boggled. So, well, I'll just go to one direct question. There are two master plans right now that have recommendations to analyze projects under the Sustainable Sites Initiative. And that's basically, lead for landscape.
Lead for sites.
That's a GBCI, program. And one thought is that instead of coming up with new terms and new things to analyze, like biophilic design, unless they're very well defined and people understand them, could there be a tiered system where you show how you comply with sustainable sites at either certified silver, gold, or something? Because they already have done a lot of work on the metrics for those and how to document them. So maybe it's an alternative. You could do these things, or because I'm doing the analyses for projects now, and it'd be great for them to get credit for it, because I don't know what happens after I send them in. Just for like, you check the box and you move on.
Yeah.
Josh, can you put that in the chat? The certification that's already in place. It's kind of hard to hear you.
Sustainable Sites Initiative. It's a lead USGBC. So Josh, that's a very good point. And I think we could certainly consider sort of having that one of the options, right? Like do ABC or get certification. I think what we were also trying to balance is like getting it costs money too, right? So, and it puts you into a commitment of compliance and other things, which some developers are fine with that because it brings a brand to their project that they're interested in promoting. Others might be okay with doing those things, but don't want to go through the certification. But two things we can do. One, certainly look at including this as an option for sustainable sites. If there's a specific certification within the program that you're referring to, that'll be great to know. And two, when we list things like biophilic design or bird-friendly design, we are hoping that in the implementation guidelines, we will reference a standard that's very clear. You know, that so that it's not like gray what that means. It should be tagged to a standard that's very clear and objective.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, comments?
Just one, so you said you have two virtual, hearings coming up. Is there anything in person as well, in terms of outreach?
No, we have two virtual open houses on the 8th and the 15th. And then we have planning board working sessions during which we would also request that testimony be allowed through the month of July. We didn't do an in-person one simply because then we wouldn't know where to locate it appropriately and where to go and where not to go. And it seemed to us that doing it virtually might cast a broader net and allow more people to participate.
Thank you. I was just
Yep.
curious, understand what the
We
Virtual.
also have the office hours.
Yeah, and the next like 2 weeks are really open office hours for anybody who wants to talk with us more about this. And even people on the call, if you represent a certain type of professional group or please reach out to us. We are happy to schedule sort of combined meetings where we can talk to a group of professionals that represent a certain industry or a perspective and are truly open to taking feedback on this before we get to the board. And when we get to the council, we'll do it all over again. Well, if we don't have other thoughts or comments at this point, we can conclude the meeting. We will send out the PowerPoint that we shared today, as well as a link to sign up for the virtual open houses and at least tentative dates for the planning board working sessions. And we, again, thank you so much for staying with us through the course as we develop these, and hopefully we can refine and edit these to bring them to be really strong recommendations that updates what was a nationally sort of significant policy and bring it up to modern times and look to the next decade for guiding optional method in the county. So thank you a lot. And Robert, if you wanted to mention anything before we sign off.
No, there's a lot of work that's gone into this and a lot more to come. I think as we try to wrap things up to get it in front of the board and up to the council. And no, appreciate everyone's input. And we know this is a lot that has been provided, and so look forward to your feedback. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for such a comprehensive presentation. It was really fun and interesting to see how all that work has ended up in such an interesting place. So looking forward to diving into the details, getting back to you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.